Jealousy is a complex and agonizing feeling that can suddenly overwhelm a person. It manifests as a painful knot tightening in the chest. The source of jealousy can be anything: a message received by a partner, a friend's choice in favor of another person, the feeling that someone is vying for your place. Sometimes irrational and absurd, jealousy undermines emotional balance and turns love into a source of doubt. But what lies at the heart of this feeling? Is jealousy an acquired trait, or is it embedded in human nature itself? And perhaps the most important question: how can one get rid of jealousy? To find answers, it is necessary to explore the depths of the human mind, to turn to psychology, biology, and, of course, to personal experience familiar to everyone. After all, despite denial, everyone has experienced jealousy at least once in their life. First of all, it is important to understand that jealousy is not the same as envy. Envy is the desire to possess something that another person has. Jealousy, on the other hand, is the fear of losing what one already has, the fear of being rejected and replaced. This fear is not a product of modernity, social networks, or new forms of relationships. It has roots in the distant past of humanity. Remember that in prehistoric times, belonging to a group was vital. Exclusion from the tribe meant certain death. Jealousy could serve as a protective mechanism, allowing one to avoid banishment and maintain their place in the community. Even in the animal world, manifestations of jealousy are observed. Primates fight for the attention of a partner. Dogs stand between their owner and other animals. This is a deep-seated instinct rooted in our DNA. However, if jealousy is such an integral part of human nature, should we simply accept its existence as an inevitable fact? Not at all. This is where psychology comes into play, offering us keys to understanding this complex feeling. Sigmund Freud, for example, viewed jealousy as an echo of our deep, repressed desires, while modern psychologists tend to see it as a reflection of low self-esteem and feelings of insecurity. When we doubt our own worth, it seems to us that we can easily be replaced. And when we allow ourselves to think that someone else can offer our partner something that we cannot, jealousy blossoms, manifesting as an automatic protective reaction. But what happens when jealousy gets out of control and begins to dictate our actions? This is where the real danger lies. Experiencing jealousy is quite natural, but allowing it to dictate our behavior can lead to catastrophic consequences. It can turn healthy relationships into a toxic environment, generate endless conflicts, and ultimately destroy trust, the fragile foundation of any relationship. Remember the numerous stories where jealousy pushed people to secretly check their partner's phones, stage tumultuous scenes in public places, and engage in endless arguments over innocent conversations. And the saddest thing's that jealousy is often based not on real facts, but on our own assumptions and conjectures, which we ourselves invent and fuel until they turn into uncontrollable monsters. However, one should not despair. Although we cannot completely eradicate jealousy from our lives, we are quite capable of learning to manage it, understanding its causes, and most importantly, not allowing it to dominate us. Jealousy manifests not only in romantic relationships, it permeates friendships, the professional sphere, and even family ties. This unpleasant feeling arises when a brother or sister receives more attention from parents, when a colleague is promoted before you, when your best friend begins to share secrets with someone else, and you cease to be a priority for them. In all these situations, the feeling is the same: the fear of losing something that we consider our right. However, upon closer examination, it becomes clear that jealousy is not always a groundless, irrational impulse. Sometimes it stems from quite real intuition, from subtle signals that our subconscious reads long before we manage to realize them. A partner's suddenly changed behavior, a cooling in relations with a close friend, undeserved praise lavished by the boss on another employee. All this can serve as a warning bell, a harbinger of impending changes. In such situations, jealousy acts as a kind of warning, a subtle hint that not everything is going as it should. However, in most cases, jealousy is more a figment of our imagination than a reflection of reality. It grows on the soil of speculation, self-doubt, and the burden of past experience. A person who has experienced infidelity is more likely to experience bouts of jealousy in new relationships, even if there are no objective grounds for it. Someone who has been betrayed by a friend may view any new friendships forming around them with suspicion. Our minds are like archives of painful memories, and as soon as they detect something remotely resembling a past trauma, an alarm is triggered. This is where the key point lies. Jealousy is not just an emotion, it is a reflection of our personal history. It is shaped by past events, inflicted grievances, and learned ways of defending against emotional pain. But here's the paradox. By succumbing to jealousy, we often provoke the very thing we desperately fear. Imagine a person who constantly suspects their partner without the slightest reason, checks their phone, interrogates them, and explodes with anger at every meeting with friends. Gradually, the atmosphere in the relationship becomes extremely tense, and the other person begins to feel cornered, deprived of freedom and understanding. What started as an unfounded fear eventually becomes reality. The relationship cracks and ultimately collapses, not because of infidelity, but because jealousy undermined trust, the cornerstone of any healthy relationship. The question of distinguishing between natural and toxic jealousy deserves close attention. What is the fundamental difference between these two seemingly similar experiences? Natural jealousy, like a fleeting shadow, arises episodically as a reaction to a specific situation and disappears just as quickly, leaving no long-term consequences. It is a brief flare-up that does not cloud the prospect of the relationship or provoke destructive behavior. In contrast, toxic jealousy is an obsessive, all-consuming feeling that has a devastating effect on the dynamics of a relationship. It manifests itself in a desire for total control, manipulation of the partner, and a morbid obsession with their every move. A person prone to toxic jealousy does not seek a trusting dialogue and a search for the truth, but only fuels their own irrational fears. Every gesture, word, or action of the partner is carefully analyzed in search of the slightest signs of infidelity. Here, the deep-seated fear of being rejected or abandoned comes to the fore. Often, unhealthy jealousy is just a symptom of a more serious psychological problem. It is not just about the fear of losing a specific person, but about an all-consuming fear of loneliness and worthlessness. The roots of this fear can go back to early childhood, traumatic experiences in past relationships, or situations in which a person felt rejected and undervalued. For example, a child who constantly felt that their parents preferred another child in the family may grow up with a deeply ingrained sense of insecurity, which will inevitably affect their future relationships. A person who has experienced a sudden and unexplained breakup may subconsciously project this fear onto a new partner, expecting a repeat of the painful scenario. In this context, jealousy appears not just as an emotion, but as a kind of window through which we can see our deep-seated traumas and insecurities that need healing. As it grows, jealousy casts a shadow over our perception of others, distorting their images. The mind switches to a heightened state of alert, where even minor details seem like ominous omens. An unexpected change in intonation in the voice of a loved one, a mysterious laugh while reading a message, or a casual meeting with friends. All of this turns into alarm signals that make the heart beat faster. Trust, which once seemed like an unshakable foundation, becomes fragile, like thin ice, ready to crack at the slightest touch. The paradox is that the more we succumb to jealousy, the more distorted reality becomes. Relationships that once seemed reliable and safe turn into a battlefield ruled by suspicion, interrogation, and anxiety. An illusory world arises in which it becomes increasingly difficult to distinguish truth from fiction, the real from the imaginary. At this point, projection comes into play, a psychological mechanism where a jealous person not only fears the possible actions of a partner, but also attributes their own hidden thoughts and desires to them. For example, a person who has had thoughts of cheating, even if they have never acted on them, may experience intense jealousy, believing that their partner thinks the same way. Their own secret thoughts become a mirror in which they see a reflection of others' intentions. However, jealousy affects not only our perception of others, but also our sense of self. A person who constantly experiences jealousy begins to doubt their own worth, wondering if they are good enough, if they have everything they need to maintain the interest of a partner or friends. The paradox is that by immersing oneself in this vicious cycle of insecurity, instead of becoming stronger, a person weakens, which, ironically, can push others away. Now is the time to shed light on the fundamental difference between episodic jealousy, a fleeting glimmer of uncertainty, and obsessive jealousy, which, like an ominous shadow, turns into a destructive algorithm of thinking. If the former is merely a spontaneous reaction to a specific event, the latter is a relentless whirlpool, drawing a person into an endless cycle, independent of external circumstances. The victim of obsessive jealousy is obsessed with finding new confirmations of their dark suspicions. Even if there are no objective reasons for concern, the mind begins to invent alternative explanations, distort past events, or create unreal scenarios in the head, fueling painful experiences. This type of jealousy can transform into a kind of emotional addiction, where the brain begins to desperately need constant confirmation and total control. A person finds themselves in a closed circle, where peace becomes unattainable, because there will always be a new reason to fear. It is here that the most destructive patterns of behavior manifest themselves. Some individuals invade their partner's personal space, secretly viewing their correspondence or social networks. Others resort to sophisticated manipulations, causing their partner to feel guilty for actions they did not commit. In the most tragic cases, jealousy results in verbal or physical aggression, turning into a serious psychological and social problem. However, jealousy is not only a personal tragedy for the one who experiences it. It inflicts deep wounds on those who are on the other side of the barricades. A person who is constantly suspected and controlled sooner or later begins to feel powerless, realizing that no effort can prove their loyalty. Emotional devastation arises, a feeling of suffocation, which, ironically, can lead to alienation not because of a lack of feelings, but because of complete exhaustion. How do we come to such a state, when a fleeting feeling of jealousy grows into an all-consuming passion, clouding reason and poisoning the soul? Jealousy, like a cunning virus, penetrates the consciousness and distorts the perception of reality, having a destructive effect on the emotional state. Just yesterday, a person was confident and calm in their relationships, and today one random glance or an insignificant conversation can generate a storm of anxiety and doubt. Calmness becomes fragile and vulnerable ready to crumble at any moment under the onslaught of the slightest detail. This oppressive feeling of uncertainty pushes many to seek ways to soothe the emotional pain, but instead of healing, they only exacerbate the situation. How does this happen? Through actions that at first glance seem saving, but in reality only add fuel to the fire of jealousy. One of the most common manifestations is the obsessive need for confirmation. A person tormented by jealousy craves assurances of love and fidelity, asking the same questions, demanding proof and signs of attention. Do you love me? Why were you looking at your phone for so long? Tell me that I am the only one for you. These questions, which seem innocent at first, create an atmosphere of tension and distrust when repeated constantly, undermining the foundation of relationships. Another common behavior pattern is comparison. The jealous mind begins to feverishly evaluate every aspect of one's own personality in comparison with others. Am I more attractive than the one he or she was talking to? Am I less successful? Am I less interesting? This pernicious habit of constantly comparing oneself with others breeds a feeling of dissatisfaction and inferiority. Instead of focusing on strengthening relationships, attention shifts to imaginary rivals, the existence of which is often only a figment of the imagination. Next, there is the problem of obsessive thoughts, when jealousy takes over the mind and it turns into a factory for the production of apocalyptic scenarios. Questions begin to swirl in the head, poisoning the soul. What if in my absence he or she is seeking solace in the arms of another? What if his or her feelings for me have faded, but he or she cannot find the courage to admit it? Is he or she hiding something important from me? These agonizing thoughts can arise even in the absence of any real basis, simply because anxiety needs something to focus on. Over time, this state of constant suspicion leads to emotional exhaustion, not only for the jealous person, but also for the one who is nearby. Every conversation turns into a minefield. Every action must be carefully thought out to avoid an explosion of jealousy. Relationships, which in theory should be an oasis of trust and intimacy, turn into an endless battle for emotional security. However, there lies a paradox. Despite all the pain that jealousy brings, many people refuse to acknowledge its presence. It is as if admitting to jealousy is a mark of weakness, a flaw to be ashamed of. Instead of openly facing the problem and starting to work on themselves, many prefer to find excuses or mask it under plausible pretexts. I'm jealous because I care about you, or I just want to protect our relationship. Such a mindset is dangerous, as it normalizes jealousy, turning it into something permissible, while it can be extremely destructive. The main thing is not to ignore jealousy and not to pretend that it does not exist, but to learn to recognize it, understand its roots, and most importantly, not to allow it to control your actions and decisions. Jealousy, which seems like a personal experience, is actually deeply rooted in the social context. Our feeling and manifestations of jealousy are shaped not only by individual characteristics, but also by upbringing, past experiences in relationships, and assimilated ideas about love and ownership. From an early age, many of us are exposed to the idea that true love implies some degree of jealousy. Common phrases heard in songs, movies, and everyday conversations, such as, "If he's jealous, it means he loves," or "A loving person will not tolerate a rival," reinforce the idea of jealousy as proof of love, rather than as a problem requiring a mature solution. These beliefs have a significant impact on our behavior in relationships. Some people begin to believe that the absence of jealousy in a partner indicates a lack of interest. In other cases, jealousy turns into a tool of control, justifying surveillance, manipulation, and even isolation under the guise of love. However, that is not all. The cultural environment also plays an important role in shaping our experience of jealousy. In some societies, jealousy is perceived as a natural and inevitable component of relationships, while in others it is considered a sign of insecurity or lack of trust. Gender roles also influence the manifestation of jealousy in men and women. In many cultures, male jealousy is associated with the idea of dominance and protection. Men are instilled with the need to protect their partner, which sometimes leads to possessive views and attempts to limit her communication or activity. In turn, female jealousy is more often associated with the fear of being rejected or with a sense of rivalry with other women. Although both sexes can experience jealousy with equal intensity, the ways of expressing and justifying it can vary significantly. In the modern world, it is impossible to ignore the impact of information technology on human relationships. In the past, in order to find out about the actions of your significant other, you had to rely on the words of others or personal observations. However, today, thanks to social networks, messengers, and geolocation, the possibilities for surveillance have become almost unlimited. Social networks have radically changed the nature of jealousy. Any like, comment, or new acquaintance in the virtual space can be perceived as an alarming signal. Conflicts arise over online actions that would not have mattered in real life. The ability to access a partner's phone, read their correspondence, and track their movement slurs the line between trust and invasion of personal space. Moreover, social networks not only amplify jealousy, but sometimes create it out of nowhere. After breaking up with someone, it used to be only possible to guess about the further life of the former partner. Now, with one click of the mouse, you can find out who they are dating, where they go, and what photos they post. Such constant availability of information makes it difficult to fight jealousy, because the temptation to check and compare yourself with others is always present. Here arises another interesting aspect: self-destructive behavior. Some people, even realizing that certain actions will cause them pain, deliberately seek out situations that fuel their jealousy. They browse the profiles of former lovers, look for old photos, and read comments from strangers. Instead of avoiding discomfort, they seek it out time and time again, as if they need confirmation of their darkest fears. When jealousy takes over the mind, it not only distorts the perception of reality, but also changes our behavior towards others. Innocent actions seem suspicious, and any changes in behavior are perceived as alarming signals. However, the most paradoxical aspect of jealousy is that the individual consumed by this feeling unwittingly provokes the development of events that confirm their worst fears, pushing the partner towards emotional distance. This phenomenon, known as a self-fulfilling prophecy, unfolds as follows. A jealous person, tormented by thoughts of their partner's possible interest in someone else, begins to exhibit possessive tendencies, bombarding them with questions and striving for total control. This behavior, as it escalates, creates an atmosphere of discomfort and tension in the relationship, forcing the partner to distance themselves, not because of a newfound interest in another person, but because of unbearable psychological pressure. However, in the jealous person's distorted reality, this distancing serves as irrefutable proof of their correctness, closing a vicious cycle that is extremely difficult to break. Jealousy, by the way, poisons not only romantic relationships, but also permeates the spheres of friendship, professional activities, and even family ties. There are people who react painfully to the attention given to their friends by others, experience resentment when a colleague is promoted, or feel a mixture of envy and disappointment when a brother or sister receives greater recognition. In such situations, jealousy does not always result in open conflicts, often manifesting itself in the veiled form of sarcastic remarks, passive-aggressive behavior, or attempts to discredit the object of envy. This can be expressed in subtle belittling of others' achievements, diminishing the significance of successes, or even in a persistent search for shortcomings that serve as justification for one's own internal discomfort. It should not be forgotten that jealousy is not always without foundation. It is quite understandable that a person who has experienced deceit or betrayal experiences a certain wariness in new relationships. However, the problem arises when this wariness becomes the defining lens through which all events are perceived, even in the absence of real evidence. The human mind tends to build patterns and look for connections where they do not exist. When jealousy takes over, the brain enters a state of heightened anxiety, and then every little thing begins to seem like confirmation of suspicions. A partner's lateness, laughter with another person, a change in the usual daily routine. All this can be interpreted as signs of infidelity or cooling feelings. But jealousy also has a biological basis. From an evolutionary point of view, it arose as a mechanism to ensure reproduction and preservation of genetic heritage. In the past, jealousy may have served to keep a partner in a relationship, ensuring that resources and protection had remained within the family. However, in the modern world, where relationships have become more diverse and complex, this instinct can turn from an advantage into a serious problem. Interestingly, despite its negative nature, jealousy can give pleasure to some people. There are those who find enjoyment in the drama, the feeling of danger, or the adrenaline rush that arises in a situation of uncertainty. In some romantic unions, the reconciliation that follows a flare-up of jealousy can be so emotionally charged that it causes a kind of addiction. This explains the phenomenon of recurring cycles of quarrels and reconciliations, in which jealousy becomes a kind of catalyst, determining the dynamics of the relationship. Such emotional roller coasters, where passionate quarrels are replaced by stormy forgiveness, can form a stable, albeit destructive, pattern of behavior in a couple.